A group of rough, racist bikers thought they could humiliate a lone black soldier at a rural bar. They didn't know who they were messing with. But when he stood up, calm and proud, what happened next didn't just shut them up. Pitt changed the bar forever. The sky over Southridge, Georgia, was painted in dusky strokes of amber and crimson as the sun slipped behind the pine trees lining the narrow roads that coiled through the countryside, like sleeping snakes. The kind of evening where the air turns cooler, but the heat from the day still lingers in the concrete, and the hum of cicadas becomes the rhythm of the night. Sergeant Malcolm Reed pulled his black Dodge Challenger into the gravel lot outside of Jake's Tavern, a place that didn't appear on Google Maps and didn't need to. Locals knew it, outsiders avoided it, and folks like Malcolm were silently warned away with a look, a pause, a subtle shaking of the head. But Malcolm wasn't the kind of man to flinch at sideways glances. After years of combat deployments, surviving roadside bombs in Kandahar, pulling wounded soldiers from firefights in Tikrit, and standing shoulder to shoulder with brothers of every color under the sun, he had grown more steel than nerves. Still, he wasn't here to make a point. All he wanted was a beer, a quiet moment, and the kind of silence that doesn't require words. He wore jeans, boots, dusty from travel, and a gray hoodie pulled halfway over a t-shirt that bore the fading insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Nothing flashy, no medals, no bravado, just a man seeking rest. As he stepped into the tavern, the door creaked like it hadn't been oiled in years, and every neck in the place turned toward him. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The music, playing on the jukebox, a Johnny Cash song, kept going, but even it seemed to lower its voice. Malcolm looked around, reading the room like he'd been trained. 2 corners first, exits second, threats third. A group of older men at the bar, in worn denim jackets with oil-stained hands, looked him over with open suspicion. A couple sitting in a booth stopped sipping their drinks. The bartender, a lanky man with thinning hair and a Georgia Bulldogs t-shirt, furrowed his brow as if trying to decide if he should pretend the beer tap was broken. And then there was them, the Iron Vultures. 6 of them, leather cuts with the black and silver vulture patch on the back, beards like tangled ropes, boots heavy enough to stomp out a wildfire. One of them, a tall guy with a long scar running down the side of his neck, nudged the man beside him and muttered something with a smirk. They all turned to look. Then laughter, the kind that wasn't friendly. Malcolm exhaled slowly through his nose and walked calmly to an empty stool near the bar. Not too close to anyone, but not cowering either. He sat and gave a nod to the bartender. "Whatever's on tap," he said evenly. The bartender hesitated, then grabbed a glass and poured. The beer foamed too much. The man slid it over without meeting Malcolm's eyes. "You lost, boy," came a voice from behind. Malcolm didn't turn around right away. He sipped the beer. Not bad, probably local. He finally turned to see the scarred biker standing a few feet back, arms crossed, the others behind him chuckling. "Didn't realize this bar had a dress code," Malcolm replied. "Or a color code." That silenced the laughter for a beat. Then came another round of snickering, darker this time. "You think you're funny?" Skarnek asked, stepping closer. "No," Malcolm said, turning back to his beer, "but I think you're used to people pretending you are." "That one landed?" Skarnek's eyes narrowed. Another biker stepped up, stockier, with tattoos creeping up his neck like ivy. "We don't want trouble," he said, in a voice that meant the opposite. "Then maybe sit down," Malcolm offered. "Drink your beer, enjoy your night." The tension swelled like a thundercloud. The bartender looked like he wanted to disappear into the shelves. A woman seated nearby picked up her purse and moved toward the door. Skarnek placed his hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "You're in the wrong bar, boy." Time slowed. Not in the dramatic, Hollywood way, but in that real, primal way that warriors know. When seconds stretch long enough to make 1,000 decisions, Malcolm could feel the hand, heavy, threatening, testing, but he didn't flinch. He turned, looked the man dead in the eye, and said, "Move your hand, now." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. There was something in Malcolm's voice, calm, cold, firm, that made the laughter stop altogether. Skarnek didn't move. Malcolm stood, and when he did, the room seemed to shrink. He wasn't just taller than Skarnek, he was solid, balanced, and clearly trained. His stance said everything. This wasn't his first threat, wouldn't be his last. For a moment the biker looked like he might take a swing. Then Malcolm reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it, flipped a few cards, and then held up one. A military ID. The kind that bore the U.S. Army crest. The kind that meant something. "Sergeant First Class Malcolm Reed," he said. "U.S. Army, Ranger. You want to finish what you started?" He didn't say it like a challenge. He said it like a fact. The room inhaled. Skarnek stepped back, hands still clenched, but less certain now. Another biker muttered. "Damn." The bartender whispered something to himself. Something like "should have known." Malcolm tucked the ID away and sat back down. "Still waiting on my beer," he said. The bartender scrambled to get a fresh glass. Foam perfect this time. One of the bikers, the youngest of the group, a guy barely out of his 20s, with no beard and doubt in his eyes, looked at Malcolm with something other than contempt. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt. "You really a ranger?" he asked quietly. Malcolm looked at him, nodded. "Seen combat." Malcolm stared into his beer for a long moment. Images flickered in his mind to storms. Gunfire, friends bleeding out, under moonlight, medals pinned over hospital sheets, funerals with folded flags. Yeah, he said softly. Too much. The young biker looked away, ashamed. Skarnek wasn't finished, though. That don't mean nothing here, he growled. You think that badge makes you better than us? Malcolm turned to face him fully now. The smile was gone. What replaced it was something heavier, older, forged and lost, but it means I've fought for people like you, even when you wouldn't fight for me. I've bled for this country, not for applause, but because I believed we could be better, even if some people prove me wrong every day. That hit like a gut punch. A silence fell over the room, not the awkward kind, but the kind that makes people think, deeply, uncomfortably. Malcolm finished his beer. No one spoke. No one stopped him when he stood. He left a 20 on the counter and headed for the door. Just before stepping out, he paused, looked over his shoulder, and said, "Next time you want to test someone, ask yourself what battles they've already fought. You might be out of your league." And with that, he stepped into the night air. The cicadas still singing, the stars beginning to bloom above. Behind him, the bar remained quiet, the weight of his words sinking deep. The man they thought was just another target had walked in alone, faced them down without throwing a punch, and left with something they didn't expect to lose: their pride. The wind outside Jake's tavern had picked up, scattering dry leaves and dust across the parking lot, as if the town itself was trying to shake off the tension still lingering from the previous night. Inside the bar, however, everything had changed, slowly, but undeniably. The incident with Malcolm Reed had left a scar that the regulars couldn't pretend away. No fists had flown, no bottles shattered, but something far more dangerous had happened. A mirror had been held up to their prejudices, and what they saw looking back wasn't strength or loyalty, it was fear, ignorance, and fragility. Word of the encounter traveled fast. Southridge was small, and gossip faster than wildfire. By sunrise, everyone from the hardware store owner to the high school janitor had heard about the black guy who stood down the Iron Vultures. Some stories exaggerated details, made him sound like a kung fu master, or claimed he flipped one of the bikers onto a table. But the truth was more unsettling. He didn't need to. He won without raising his voice or lifting a hand. And that's what really stunned them. The young biker from the night before, Tyler, sat on the back steps of the bar that morning, cigarette dangling from his fingers, still wrestling with what he'd seen. He'd grown up on stories of the Vultures being untouchable. His father had ridden with them before his DUI conviction, and Tyler had been desperate to find acceptance somewhere, anywhere, since dropping out of school. But seeing Malcolm stand so tall, so composed, while the toughest men in the room shrank before him, that flipped a switch in Tyler's brain he couldn't turn off. Meanwhile, Malcolm wasn't thinking about the bar at all. He was checking into a modest motel just outside of town, intending to rest for the night before continuing his drive to visit his younger sister in Atlanta. The scars on his knuckles ached a little from the cold, but he welcomed the sting. It reminded him he was alive. After a hot shower and a few quiet calls to check in on his army buddies, Malcolm sat in silence, scrolling through the news, and that's when his phone buzzed with a message from his former commanding officer, Cal Davis. "Heard you handled some trouble last night. Proud of you, son. The way you always carry yourself, Ranger standards." Malcolm smiled faintly. It wasn't about praise. It was about being remembered for the right reasons. What he didn't know, at that moment, was that a woman at the bar, one of the few who hadn't joined in the taunting, had quietly recorded part of the encounter on her phone and posted it online with the caption, "This man walked into a racist bar and walked out with his dignity and their silence." The clip caught fire. Within 12 hours, it had been reposted by a popular veterans page, then picked up by a regional news affiliate. Comments poured in. "Respect. This is what a real warrior looks like. Thank you for your service, Sergeant Reed." By the next day, Malcolm was a name on Twitter and a face on Facebook, though he hadn't asked for any of it. Still, even fame couldn't undo the history behind what happened. And for the people of Southridge especially, the Iron Vultures, the spotlight was burning. That night, the tavern was quieter than usual. Skarnek hadn't shown up. Neither had a few of the louder guys. But Tyler returned, this time without the cut or the gang insignia. He wore a hoodie, just like Malcolm had, and kept his head low. The bartender gave him a wary look. "You good?" he asked. Tyler nodded. "Just here to listen." Something in the air felt different, like the threat had drained out of the place, leaving only reflection behind. It was around then that the front door creaked open again, and a familiar figure stepped through. Malcolm, clean-shaven now, wearing a black-collared shirt and jeans, his army boots the only hint of his identity. Conversations stopped, but not out of hostility this time, more like curiosity, a quiet tension. Malcolm made his way to the bar. The same bartender from the night before stood behind the counter. This time, he nodded with a mix of respect and regret. "On the house," he said, pouring a fresh glass and sliding it over. "Didn't realize who you were." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Does that matter?" The bartender froze. Malcolm continued, voice calm but piercing. "I shouldn't have to wear my country's flag on my chest to be treated like a man. Being black and breathing should be enough. A few heads bowed. No one argued. One of the old regulars at the bar, Frank, a Vietnam vet with a limp and a voice like gravel, cleared his throat. Saw the video, he said. You got more control than most men I've known. White or black? Malcolm turned, recognizing the cadence of a fellow soldier. You served? He asked. Frank nodded. Nam. 1st Cavalry. The two men shook hands, slow, firm, knowing that simple gesture shifted something in the room. Frank looked around. A lot of folks in this town forget that freedom wasn't won by just one kind of man, he said. We all bled red. The silence after that was heavy but not hostile. It was the silence of realization, of truth hanging in the air. Tyler stood up and took a shaky step forward. I didn't say anything last night, he said, voice barely audible, but I should have. I was wrong. They were all wrong. You didn't deserve any of that. Malcolm studied him. The kid was young, scared, but sincere. What made you come back? Malcolm asked. Tyler swallowed. Because you didn't hit anyone. You could have, you didn't even yell, and that did something to me. Malcolm nodded slowly. Real strength, he said, isn't about how many people you can beat. It's about how many people you can lift, even when they try to pull you down. Tyler looked down, fighting tears. I never had anyone show me that before. You do now, Malcolm said, but it's on you to decide what to do with it. The bar fell into quiet contemplation. No music played. No beers clinked. It was as if the room itself was listening. Malcolm turned to leave, but Frank stopped him. Do you ever speak to kids? He asked. We got a VFW hall with a bunch of teens who think the world's against them. Might help to hear from someone like you. Malcolm paused. I don't give speeches, he said. Don't like the spotlight. Frank smiled. That's why they'll listen. Malcolm considered, then nodded once. Tomorrow, noon. As he walked out again, this time the door opened more gently, like even the wood had learned to respect him. Tyler turned back to the bar and whispered, he ain't just a soldier, he's a damn leader. And this time, no one laughed. Because they all saw it too. Malcolm Reed had walked into a room full of hate and left it filled with hope, not by fighting but by reminding everyone that dignity doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand. The town of Southridge had never made national news for anything more than a 4th of July piting contest or the occasional high school football upset, but within 48 hours of Malcolm Reed's quiet standoff at Jake's Tavern, it became a lightning rod for a nationwide conversation. The video of Malcolm's calm defiance had gone viral, exploding across platforms, amplified by veteran organizations, civil rights groups, and media outlets stunned by the raw dignity of a man who stood against ignorance without throwing a single punch. Cable news channels debated it, social media turned it into a symbol, and Malcolm, though reluctant, was pulled into a storm of attention. What no one expected, least of all him, was what would happen next. On the morning of the 3rd day, as the video crossed 1 million views and news vans began rolling into Southridge, Malcolm received a call from the Southridge VFW Post. Frank, the Vietnam vet who'd offered him an invitation, had organized a youth community event, with Malcolm as the guest speaker. At first, Malcolm hesitated. He didn't see himself as an activist or a preacher, he was just a soldier trying to pass through town. But something in Frank's voice, the insistence, the quiet belief, pushed him forward. That afternoon, Malcolm arrived at the VFW hall wearing a simple dress shirt and slacks. His Army Ranger pin on his collar, the only indication of who he was. The hall was packed not just with teens and veterans, but townsfolk from all walks of life, farmers in overalls, moms with young kids, students, teachers, and yes, even some bikers without their cuts. The air was thick with anticipation, and when Malcolm stepped to the front, the room quieted in seconds. He didn't use notes. He didn't shout. He simply told the truth. I didn't come here to be anyone's hero, he began. I didn't come here looking for a fight. I came for a beer, and I left with something I never expected: your attention. He paused, scanning the room, letting the weight of his words settle. There's something dangerous about silence. About the things we let slide. About the jokes we don't laugh at but don't stop. About the names we hear whispered and pretend we didn't. The audience leaned in. I've worn this country's uniform for almost 15 years, he continued. I've been shot at, bombed, and hunted halfway across the world, all in the name of protecting people's right to live free. But freedom doesn't just mean from enemies abroad, it means from hate at home. The crowd was silent. No one shuffled, no one checked their phone. When I walked into that bar, I knew what I was walking into. You could feel it in the walls, in the glances, in the way the bartender hesitated. I wasn't supposed to belong, but here's the thing: they didn't get to decide that. I belong wherever I stand, and so do you. A young black boy in the front row looked up, wide-eyed, and clutched his father's hand tighter. Dignity, Malcolm said, isn't given, it's claimed, quietly, with your posture, with your choices, with how you treat people, even when they don't deserve your kindness. His voice grew firmer now, not louder, but infused with purpose. Some people think strength is in fists, or guns, or numbers. But strength, real strength, is being able to walk away from hate without letting it stain you. At that moment, Tyler entered the room, late, but determined. He stood near the back, nervously shifting, unsure if he should be there. Malcolm noticed him, but said nothing, just gave a subtle nod. After the speech, Malcolm was swarmed by kids asking questions, by parents wanting photos, by veterans offering handshakes that lingered, but the most meaningful encounter came when Tyler stepped forward, trembling, and pulled something from his pocket. The Iron Vulture's patch. "I'm done with them," he said, voice cracking. "I want better. I don't know how yet, but I want better." Malcolm took the patch, looked at it, then handed it back. "Don't throw it away," he said. "Keep it. Let it remind you of who you were and how far you're willing to go to change." Tyler nodded, eyes misty, and hugged him. Cameras flashed, but Malcolm didn't notice. This wasn't about fame. This was about truth. The days that followed saw a ripple effect through Southridge. The town council issued a formal acknowledgement condemning racism and inviting Malcolm to help lead diversity and education initiatives. The high school civics class created a project titled Courage in Silence, centered around what they learned from Malcolm, the mayor, a white woman who'd inherited her office from 3 generations of small-town politicians, asked Malcolm to speak at the next town hall. But perhaps the most stunning shift came when several former members of the Iron Vultures publicly denounced the club and announced they were disbanding their chapter, calling it a relic of the worst parts of us. Malcolm didn't revel in that. He didn't smile or gloat. He simply said, "Growth is painful, but staying the same, that'll destroy you." Tyler started volunteering at the VFW, he got his GED, signed up for community college, and eventually, with Malcolm's guidance, applied for the Army. "Not to run from who I was," he told the recruiter, "but to prove who I can become." News outlets came and went. Awards were offered, some accepted, others declined. But Malcolm always returned to one phrase when asked what he thought of it all. "I didn't win anything. I just didn't lose myself." 1 year later, Jake's Tavern underwent renovation. It reopened under a new name, Reed's Rest. The old wood paneling was gone, replaced by open windows, live music, and a framed photograph that hung near the entrance. In the picture, Malcolm stood beside Frank, and Tyler, arms crossed, eyes steady, no smile, just purpose. Underneath the photo, a plaque read, "Here stood a man who reminded us that silence can be broken without raising a fist and that courage wears many faces." Southridge was still a small town, not perfect, but it had learned something precious, that redemption doesn't always come from punishment, but from change. From the choice to be better. And Malcolm Reed, without meaning to, had become a lighthouse not just for that bar, or that town, but for anyone who's ever walked into a room where they didn't belong and decided to stand anyway. Because sometimes, the most stunning move isn't a strike, it's standing still and letting the weight of your truth do all the talking.